Okay, so here we're writing equations in slope-intercept form that go through the given point, but unlike the first three problems we did where the lines are parallel and we use the same slope, these are perpendicular and we're going to need to use the negative reciprocal slope. So I'm going to zoom in on these and we're going to solve these one at a time here. But let's first zoom in and let's deal with this one, number 19. Move it down. Okay. Number 19. We can do it the same way each time. We can start by saying y equals mx plus b. But what we need to do here first, before we fill that in, is we need to say that if we have a slope of -3, then what is the negative reciprocal of that, or the opposite reciprocal? Well, the opposite means use the opposite sign. So if we're given a negative, then we're going to be using a slope that's positive. If we're given 3, that's really the same as 3 over 1. And when we do the reciprocal of that, then we get 1/3. Okay? So it's opposite sign and it's a reciprocal. How do we ensure that we definitely came up with the slope that's perpendicular, the opposite reciprocal? We're going to take the two slopes. This -3 is the same as -3 over 1. And we're going to multiply it by the slope that we came up with and check it. And we get -3 times 1, -3 over 1 times 3 is 3. And -3 over 3 is -1. When we multiply the two slopes, we get -1. And that ensures that we're dealing with negative reciprocals. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about using this slope for our line because the line that they gave us has a slope of -3 and our lines are perpendicular. So we need the negative reciprocal. So getting back to our original problem, we can say we're going to substitute in for y, the y coordinate, 0. For m, the slope that we need to use, 1/3. X, 0. And we will then solve for b. We get 0 equals 1/3 times 0, 0, plus b, or b is equal to 0, meaning we have a y-intercept of 0. It's going through the origin. We should have already been able to see that when x is 0, y is 0. This is one of those direct variation equations where you will have then as an equation y equals, we know the slope that we're using is 1/3, and x. Y equals 1/3 x. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Okay. Zoom out, line this back up so you can see the next bit of it. And I'm just going to rewrite that equation over here a little bit larger. Y equals 1/3 x. Hopefully you can see the math that we did over here using the y equals mx plus b formula, plugging in the point that they gave us for x and y, and then we needed to use the negative reciprocal slope. So that's our equation for number 19. We're going to repeat the process for 21 and 23. So let's zoom in. Okay. We're going to use y equals mx plus b. We're going to substitute in for y what they gave us for y. They gave us -2 as our point. We know our line is going through that point, so we need to use that as the y value. X is 1. We didn't figure out yet what m is, and we need to replace m with the proper slope. Well, what we're going to do over here is we're going to say if we were given a slope of 5, which is really the same as 5 over 1, then when you take the negative reciprocal of that, the negative or opposite of a positive number is a negative number. So we're going to have a negative, and we're going to flip the fraction to be 1 over 5. Just to check it, 5 over 1 times -1 over 5 equals -5 over 5, which equals -1. You can take any two negative reciprocal slopes and multiply them, and you should get -1 as a result. And we do. So we're going to be using this slope, -1/5. Okay? And then we have to solve for b. So we say -2 is equal to -1/5 times 1, or -1/5, plus b. And then, of course, we're going to add that to both sides to find out what b is equal to. I'm going to zoom in again just to this little spot right here as a location for doing this math problem right here, which is -2 plus 1/5. Okay? So I'm going to zoom in on that. And we say -2, or -2/1, plus 1/5 equals what? Well, we need to have a common denominator with fractions in order to add them. So the common denominator of 1 and 5, those two denominators, is 5. This one already says 5, so we can keep that as 1. And this one we need to say, well, 1 times 5 on the bottom, 1 times 5 is 5, so -2 times 5 is -10. So what we're adding together actually is -10/5 plus 1/5. And -10 plus 1 is -9/5. Okay, so that's the value that we've got. When we then shrink it down, we find out that b is equal to -9/5. So let's put it there. -9/5 for b, which is great. When we then write our equation, we're going to say, how do we write it? Let's bring it back to here. We're going to write it as y equals, what is our slope? Well, we used, remember, this slope right here, which was the negative reciprocal of the slope they gave us, of -1/5. So we have -1/5 x. And what do we figure out for the b value? That's that right there, -9/5. So minus 9. We'll box that as our answer. We're going to do this one more time for 23. So let's zoom in on it. This is what we're dealing with here. So if we are going to start by writing y equals mx plus b, and replacing y with the coordinate they gave us in y, that's 0. That's the coordinate right there, so we put in 0, equals, we're going to figure out the slope in a moment. X is whatever the x coordinate of the point they say we're going through. We're going through 5, 0, so that's the x coordinate, plus b. We're going to eventually solve for b. Okay, but what do we need to do in the meantime? In the meantime, we need to take the slope they gave us, which is 2, or another way of writing it is 2/1. And how does that become the negative reciprocal? Well, we flip it to 1/2. The numerator becomes the denominator becomes the numerator, and we have to change the sign. It was positive, so now it's negative. So that looks like what we're going to be using. But let's check them to be sure. Let's say 2/1 times -1/2. We can multiply them together, and we should be able to result in -1. And when we multiply them, we do get -1. So we know that that's the slope we want to use, -1/2. So let's resolve this, simplify it. 0 equals -1/2 times 5 is -5/2 plus b. And then in order to get b all by itself, we have to add 5/2, add 5/2. And we get 5/2 equals b. So now we know what the b value is. Up here, we know what the slope should be. So when we zoom out and we write the equation, Thanks for your patience. I'm still learning this. We have y equals the slope we need to use, negative 1/2, which is the reciprocal of the slope of the line they gave us, plus 5/2, what we calculated for the b value down on the bottom. That's actually, let me see if I can do a trick right here. Oops. Let me do that one more time. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, I won't mess with this right now. I'll figure that out later. I wanted to move it down a little bit. But we've got, for number 23, we have that as the equation of the line. And that's what you get. Those are the proper equations. We're going to do this every time the same way, right? Y equals mx plus b. Come up with whatever slope we need to use. In this case, it's the negative reciprocal of the line they gave us. And then plug in the x and y value of that point and calculate b. Then you can write the equation.